What's up, everybody? I'm John Middlekauff. You know what I need you to do. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. We got content for days reacting to every NFL game all the time, every single day. Subscribe, like the videos. Let's go. Okay, back at it again with my main man Jackson, who is truly living the dream. Update us. Are you moving to downtown, Old Town
Oh
Scottsdale
yeah.
as a
Yeah.
young man? And you're how old are you? 23, 24?
I'm 24 years old, John, about to be 25 in 2 weeks. I tell my mom this all the time. I'm a single man. I've been single for a while for two reasons. One, invested a lot of time in college football. So much parity, not a lot of time in terms of women and dates and stuff like that. But my second one, I've been living in a little studio for about a year and a half. So now we're branching out to a one bedroom. Don't have to come over. We got a couch, we got a living room. You can come over, John, grab a beer. Like the studio apartment was just not working. And I think part of it, hopefully, my dating love life will increase because I'm in a one bedroom. So that's why it's a little dry in the background. Got the helmets still in the back. Haven't packed those yet, but yeah, we're moving to Old Town, man. It's gonna be wild.
If you can't get it done down there, you might as well just retire because
Some
it
of these
should be
Scottsdale girls, man, I just don't know, man.
not
I need
even. But
to.
it's just the options are pretty
Oh
endless. I
yeah,
would say.
yeah,
So
unlimited for
good luck
sure.
in your future endeavors down in Old Town Scottsdale. You know,
We'll stay locked in. No, but I'm excited. We got a ton of questions. College football just continues to get better and better every week. So I want to start out here. You've covered the sport 15 years plus. Is this the craziest college football season that you've covered or seen? Because I mean, in the top 25 this season, we've had 49 upsets, whether it's a lower ranked team beating a higher ranked team. And then my second question is so much parity in the sport. What's rooted all of this?
well, I would say college football has dramatically changed uh, in the NIL transfer portal era. And I think we're really feeling the impacts today more than even the last couple years. Not that we didn't. I mean, we had good players that transferred to other teams, but now the dispersion of talent, like if it didn't exist, I think we would see LSU, Alabama, for example, be a lot better than they are in terms of talent on their roster. And teams like Ole Miss, who has improved greatly. I mean, they're a disaster. They're probably going to end up 9-3,
Oof.
much closer to the mean of 7 or 6 wins how they've always been. But they have players that would have been on the other team's rosters because they can buy them. And I just think you're seeing these teams like, what the hell is the difference? Of like, I'm just watching Oklahoma play Alabama, and you just watch the talent. Plus, conference realignment, right? Alabama never had to play Oklahoma on the road. Like, that was just a game that did not exist. And I think the more and more you have to play these games, it just makes it more difficult. Look at, the Big Ten just adding Oregon, USC. It's just an extra game of not a patsy. And obviously, Oregon's better than SC, but you know what I mean. So I think a lot has to do with the transfer portal, and I don't think that's going to stop. It's going to be a lot more like the NFL. Now, the good teams are always going to be the good teams because they have more money, but I think it's going to be much more difficult. For a good team with a tough schedule to go undefeated, those days are probably going to be few and far between. Because it
Yeah.
never in the NFL, you have an incredible season if you're 14-3. Like maybe we need to change our mindset of like 10-2. If you play in a big conference, is a great season.
Yeah, I saw a tweet actually. It was a couple years ago when it was the 4 team format, and it was like a 10-2 team was like ranked 5 in the country, and now it's like if you're 10-2, you're ranked 16th, 17th, 15th in the country. So you're right. The parity in the sport, the transfer portal, it's chaotic. That leads me to my second question: which loss is worse? 9 Ole Miss losing at Florida, or 7 Alabama losing to Oklahoma?
I actually think Florida's pretty good. And if you put them in the dance right now, I think a lot of people would bet on them to like beat
Mm.
Penn State or let me rephrase. I don't think it's inconceivable that they could beat like Penn State or Notre Dame on a neutral site, right? With their talent. I mean, you just watch them like defensively, they got dudes. Obviously, the young quarterback, the young running back are good. Uh, what's your question again?
No, you're good. I was just saying which loss Ole
Oh,
Miss
oh, oh!
more to
I
Florida
think,
or Alabama,
yeah.
Oklahoma. I mean, both teams were in the driver's seat, and now it's like both teams. I think I saw Ole Miss is 4% to make the CFP, and then Alabama is like 11%. And people are still thinking that SEC bias, which we'll get into later, that Alabama can still make it. But which loss do you think's worse?
I think we also gotta preface this all by both these were on the road. Like
Mm.
playing at the Swamp and playing at Norman at night is not easy. Now, Oklahoma this year has been a disaster on offense. I mean, statistically, I think their offense was one of the worst in the country. And
Mm.
from the eye test, they benched Jackson Arnold. They went to the other kid. Then they benched him and went back to Jackson Arnold, who probably had his finest moment in the program.
Yeah.
And I actually give Venables a lot of credit because in the transfer portal era, to get benched in his shoes, and he was what, like the third or fourth quarterback in Arch Manning's class. Like he was right there.
Mm.
Nico, like he's a hyped guy. He didn't like, fuck you guys, I'm out. He stayed. When I went to the Texas game, he was there playing catch. I forget the backup quarterback.
Michael Hawkins Jr., the other
Yeah,
guy?
Hawkins. He was like
Yeah.
playing, he was playing catch with them in warm-ups. Like he was into it. So like you deserve credit in a day and age where how often in that situation does the Jackson Arnold ever play another snap
Mm.
for Oakland?
Yeah,
It's
especially
very
with
rare.
the whole UNLV thing with Matthew Sluka. He could have said, you know what, I'm going to redshirt, I'm going to leave. But he stayed. And they didn't even throw the football in Alabama either. I mean, he ran for like 115 yards, 120 yards.
Yeah, I mean, I would imagine Jackson Arnold is the starting quarterback for Oklahoma next year at this pace,
If he just
right?
can't turn the ball over. Yeah.
I would say neither loss is that crazy. Like Alabama, their team just Nick Saban last year had one of the greatest coaching years in the history of his life. It's insane. And let's face it, they got a little lucky. They easily could have lost a couple games, and they won the Auburn game on a last second. It wasn't quite a Hail Mary because like he threw it like Aaron Rodgers or Brett Favre. He didn't have to heave it, but it was a 40-yard bomb in the back of the end zone to win the game. You lose, they're not in the playoff, right?
Mm.
I'm pretty sure they lose, they're not even in the SEC championship game. So
No,
it
no.
would have derailed everything. I guess my overall take is like I don't think these losses are that crazy. I think we act like it's 2015. Those days are over. All the difference of these teams, Oklahoma's good on defense. DJ Lagway is really, really good. You know, it's like, I don't know. I don't think it's really that nuts. This is not 2014 Alabama. It was a 20-point favorite where if they would have lost, this would have been the. We've already seen them lose to Vanderbilt, right? We saw that happen. I think what makes their season crazy is for a half, they beat the living piss out of Georgia. Like that's one thing that's like, God, how did that happen? I think clearly if they played again, Georgia would probably win, right?
Yeah.
At Alabama, at Georgia, neutral field. So overall take, I don't think these upsets are as crazy as the way we're like, you know, uh, not brainwashed, but just wired with college football all of our life. Like those days are over.
Mm. I think I was just more shocked by Ole Miss because they beat Georgia at home, coming off of a bye week. Their defensive front looked unstoppable. Jackson Dart looked great, came back off the ankle injury, and then they just kind of fell flat to Florida. So my next question to you is, speaking
But
of
but there's a
Florida,
good example like Jackson Dart. Everyone's been hyping this guy up.
yeah,
He has some bad moments early in the season. Then they get it rolling a little bit. I mean, they beat Georgia in a driving rainstorm, right? It wasn't like it was a tough place to play. Carson Beck was awful. Jackson Dart was making throws in that game that looked like an undrafted free agent. Like it was pretty embarrassing, his decisions. Now he wore it after the game. He was in tears. I saw his press conference, but like he threw one ball in the end zone. He threw in a triple coverage.
yeah, and it was like a minute 58 left, three timeouts on the 39-yard line.
Then they get the ball
Throws in
back.
triple coverage. Yeah, then they got the ball back, threw two interceptions. One was dropped, then threw another one. So basically threw three interceptions in 1 minute.
I do think, and I'm not an SEC historian, but if they win this week, which I would imagine is the Egg Bowl, right? They're playing Mississippi State,
Mm-hmm.
then they win their bowl game. It would be one last year's the first time in the regular season they've ever won back-to-back double-digit games, and this would be three straight years of double-digit wins. Like you guys aren't Alabama, LSU, or Ohio State. Like it's a remarkable run. You're Ole Miss. Enjoy it.
$20 million in NIL though to not make the
That's
12
yeah.
team playoff. I don't
They,
know.
they,
That's
they've been
just
brown bagging people there forever. It's just a little more money.
yeah, that's true. I was gonna ask you, then we'll move on to the next one in terms of Alabama. I mean, you're a former scout. What's been going on with Jalen Milroe? Just the inconsistencies from him. And then my second question is we kind of saw Penix with DeBoer. Year one was fine. Year two, he comes in and just takes off. Do you kind of think because Milroe has one more year left that he would go, or do you think there's so much hype around him that he'll go and probably be a first, second round quarterback.
Well, Michael Penix was a pocket quarterback, read defenses, chuck that thing around like an NFL player. Jalen Milroe is like a advanced version of what the Colts were hoping for Anthony Richardson, kind of run around, make some big plays. He's not like I don't think even if he wanted to come back, Kalen DeBoer. If you think about the quarterbacks Kalen DeBoer became Kalen DeBoer with on the national level was Jake Haener, who was a fifth round pick at Fresno State, who was originally at Washington, and then Michael Penix. These are pocket quarterbacks. Jalen Milroe is kind of a runaround. Remember, a couple years they benched Jalen Milroe last year, right in the second or third game of the season.
Yeah.
So I think this thing's over. And I listen, he's obviously a very physically gifted guy, but when it just comes to throwing the ball in the pocket, being calm, cool, collected, it's not really his thing. I saw a clip on Instagram of AJ McCarron say it's kind of like meshing of two philosophies. The way DeBoer wins with his offense is not the way Jalen operates, and they've tried to adapt, but it's just hard. And obviously, the best player on their team potentially is the 17-year-old. Maybe he's 18 now, but it's hard to get him the ball unless you're just kind of scrambling, throwing bombs.
Yeah, in the era of the transfer portal, too, people are already saying that he's going to transfer after this season because of what's going on this year. So we'll
I know
see.
this. If I was a quarterback who was good, like the equivalent of, the Penixes, the Bo Nix, whoever, Will Howard, whoever the top transfer portal becomes, and we know there's always like 10. I would be all over DeBoer in Alabama, wouldn't you? I mean, with the talent they're going to have on offense and an offensive head coach.
That's why it's tough for him because Alabama, Ohio State are one of those spoiled fan bases. I remember you talking about it on your podcast a couple weeks ago about how Alabama fans have been so spoiled. And then you lose 2 games, you freak out. You lose 3, everyone's freaking out. But it's like Kalen DeBoer was the perfect hire. It's his first year. Let's relax. He doesn't have most of his guys. You're right too. The identity of the quarterback position is not one that he's used to heading in. Like he just kind of just came into Milroe.
Yeah, he didn't get to choose a guy.
Yeah.
And what was he supposed to do? They just went toe to toe with Michigan. Like
And
he
it
was going
happened
to be
in
their
it
starter.
happened in like February, I think, too. So it was like after the portal, and then you had to wait
Oh
till the
yeah,
spring
yeah.
transfer portal, guys leaving, guys coming in. So, but speaking of the portal, how do you view Indiana 10-1 after their blowout loss to Ohio State?
I don't take him seriously anymore. That second half, I think they had after the first drive. I mean, the quarterback threw for under 100 yards, and this Ohio State team isn't exactly known like some of Tressel's dominant defenses of the or Urban Meyer's. Like that's not the vibe here. They don't got Joey, Nick Bosa, and Chase Young running after you. But like they got lucky because I think if Chalk just would have handled business on Saturday and all those upsets wouldn't happen, if A&M would have won, Ole Miss would have won, and Alabama would have won, I would have said Indiana shit out of luck. But like 3 losses is a lot different than one, even if your schedule's easier. I think I don't even know who they're playing this week, but Purdue,
Purdue.
yeah, they're who's I think like the worst team in the Big Ten, right?
Yeah.
So I would have I got no problem with Indiana getting in, given that these teams have 3 losses. If all those teams had 2 losses, I would feel no sympathy if they got left out. And I think they would be in grave danger of getting left out. But do you agree? Like, it feels like they're in.
Yeah, they're in. I was going to compare it to like
Probably the
Final
last
Four.
the last Power Four seed, though, whatever that is.
Yeah, I think right now you're going to have a 10-1 Indiana. You're going to have the loser of the ACC game. You could potentially have Clemson, South Carolina, depending on how that game goes this weekend. And then you would start to get into the Alabamas of the world, potentially squeaking their way back in. But I think it's got to be Indiana. I mean, it sucks because they're probably going to get blown out the first round. And I kind of compare it when I went to the Final Four last year, where the product wasn't the greatest because all the games UConn just blew everyone out. So I think if you're the CFP, you kind of sit back and you're like, damn, like we don't want any blowout games, especially for television ratings, money wise, and
But
stuff like that.
they've
too.
always had blowouts. I think the
That's true.
average margin of victory once they went to the Final Four from the championship game, what year that started, like 14 or 15. I think the average margin of victory in the semifinal games was pretty big for like a 6-year span. So I mean, it's inevitable. Could you argue that if Notre Dame were to lose this weekend to USC, they'd still be in, or would they be screwed?
They'd be screwed too. Yeah, they'd be screwed. That NIU loss, man, is just too tough. But Hopefully they can come back and beat USC. We'll see. But my next question for you: ever since I was born, the SEC has dominated the college football world. This season, the SEC went no divisions. Last week, Greg Sankey complained that on Twitter that his top teams, based on strength of schedule, should get in the playoff over in Indiana. And then this all happens last week. So my question to you is: how do you view what's happened with the SEC, and do you think the SEC bias is going to carry on to the playoff?
What year were you born?
99, barely.
Jesus.
Yeah.
Make me feel old. That's a good year to be born. You had you were born right. You never even had shitty internet. Yeah, once you came into your own, you just had good high speed Wi-Fi.
Yeah, yeah.
Half of
And
my
a
life,
television in front of my face. Yeah.
half of my life, if you said the word Wi-Fi, no, people would look at you like, "What is that? A dish at a restaurant?" I would say the SEC bias exists simply because Nick Saban won whatever 6 championships over the last whatever years. We have several other Cam Newton championship, LSU championship. Like we have seen other championships. Ohio State basically lands Urban Meyer when he quits the SEC after dominating at Florida multiple national championships and immediately takes them to a national championship. And then the draft every year speaks for itself. They always have the most players drafted. Like I was talking to Colin about this. And listen, I get Joel Klatt's loyalty. He's part of the Big Ten, essentially, right? FOX. And Danny Cannell's an ACC guy at Florida State. And they get so angry at the SEC. But I think if you don't have any bias, I didn't go to any of these schools. I went to fucking Cal Poly. I just watch college football because I love it my whole life. If you watch Auburn against A&M or Oklahoma against Alabama, and you didn't know like the rankings or who's good, who's bad, you would just think like, look at all the good players on Auburn, like their speed. Like how many guys, if let's just take 10 schools in the Big Ten, not named Ohio State or even probably Michigan, how many guys at Iowa or Minnesota or Wisconsin or Nebraska would they want off Auburn's roster or Oklahoma's roster on their roster? Like, would they cut immediately their guy to take that guy? It'd be a ton. And that's where it's like, listen, I get like, well, they're 7-5. They're not that good. Just watch them play, especially at home, because their environments, I think we have to acknowledge, are way harder to play. And now because of the TV deals, I saw ESPN just tweeted out like the television ratings. These SEC games, I mean, like 5 to 10 million people are watching them all at night because they got the night slots now. And these environments look incredible. Like I wouldn't say Norman, Oklahoma is known for like being the most incredible home field. And that place at night was rocking. Mm. So I think when you factor in like the NFL talent all these schools have, like they've earned the bias. Big Ten could change it. Like what would the Big Ten do if the Pac-12 hadn't dissolved and they didn't just get to add Oregon? We'd be talking about their conference being a joke. It's like Ohio State. Well, Ohio State's been good. I don't know. I've been alive 40 years that entire time, probably even longer. Like Penn State, no one takes seriously. Everyone's making fun of Indiana. Like, what would they be? Like they're like claiming Oregon. Like Oregon's been there for fucking 5 minutes. So like I don't know. The other two conferences we all acknowledge like yeah they're lucky to get one, right? Did you say like do you think the ACC might get two now? Is that like
they'll probably get two because both teams being one loss, and if both teams bearing that Miami doesn't lose to Syracuse next week, I don't know who SMU plays, but they probably play some lower ranked team in the ACC.
So Clemson's out, correct?
Yeah, I mean, you never know with the chaos. They technically still have South Carolina, so they finished their conference games. So if Miami or SMU loses, they would get, or not SMU because they clinched, but if Miami loses, they would get in the ACC championship. But it's slim, but they still have a chance if they beat South Carolina to get in as at large. So,
but Miami plays Florida State this week, right?
I think Miami plays Syracuse.
Oh no, that game already happened. Actually,
yeah, that game already happened. But to your point about the Big Ten, like everyone's complaining about Indiana's schedule being so weak. Like most of their schedule is the Big Ten conference being 6-5, 5-6, 7-4 teams. Like
exactly.
It's obviously,
like everyone's ripping their schedule. They just played a pretty normal Big Ten schedule, right? I mean, and those teams, like we just look, you just beat the shit out of Nebraska. Like you just don't get that much credit for that, which is not necessarily their fault. But these are the current situation. The actual world we're living in is these teams are just not that good. I wish they were good. I want Nebraska to be good. And every time I watch them, I'm like, God, Riola is the most overrated player in recent memory. But that is like, but now who's Michigan? Like all the hype on Michigan's going to be around this Underwood kid, who like all of our lives that we've been following, like college basketball isn't typically like this. If there's a guy at Underwood's level, like the hype at that level, or Riola's level, even if the guy doesn't live up to the hype, he's at the number one overall pick, he's like the seventh pick or the 12th pick in the NBA draft. In college football, it's like this guy's going to change the program. 2 years later, he's like third string. Now with transfer portal, he's just gone. So it's like we know the SEC, like whether the hype or not, like their recruits always turn into big time players. I think the Big Ten, some of these schools, the hype hasn't matched the actual player, which has been a major problem for, Riola being average. I don't want to say fuck Nebraska, but it obviously had a huge impact. If Underwood doesn't live up to the hype, which is going to be huge, it's going to be a problem. I had never heard of CJ Stroud. Now I don't follow recruiting like some, but like he just started. Now, obviously, he was a big recruit. He's at Ohio State, but
Mm.
it was like, damn, this guy can play. And that, I think sometimes now with the money, it just has derailed. It's hard. I heard a story about Riola. He like lives at this super nice house, kind of by himself with some family. Like Matt Leinart, when he was going to school, just like had a house probably with like Reggie Bush and like an offensive lineman. And it's those. And listen, you could still brown bag guys back then, but it was everyone was kind of together, and you just played with whoever you came in with the class, and then the class under you for like 3 or 4 years. And now it's like everyone's kind of, it's almost like pro sports, but also kind of not. It's just a
Mm.
very bizarre time if you don't have the right culture and you're breaking off these freshmen for millions of dollars, which are mainly just the quarterbacks, and then they don't live up to it. Imagine being like a guard at Nebraska who's, let's just say you're making 80 grand from the NIL and you're a good player. You're like going to be an NFL guy one day. And you see this Riola guy who everyone has been circle jerking for, it feels like probably around the program for several years. I think his uncle's on the staff. Now, granted, like they played there. His dad's a legendary player. And all you do is hear about this. And then you start playing the games. You're like, well, what are we doing? This isn't
Mm.
really working. And that's to me how resentment starts. You see it in the NFL, but what eventually happens? A guy gets benched, a guy gets cut. In college now with NIL, it's harder. It's like, what are you going to do? Bench Dylan Raiola because he has a bad 3 game? Hell no.
Yeah, I was gonna ask you my next question. You talked about Bryce Underwood, long commit of LSU, decommits and goes to Michigan for a guaranteed NIL deal of $12+ million. What if a program signs a guy like this? Expectations got to be national championship or money's not worth it for this kid. Like what are the expectations for Underwood heading in? And then my second question is this a good move for Michigan? Because we even talked last week, like you even said, I have a hard time paying 10, $12 million to a freshman when I could go out and get a transfer portal guy, 5 year senior that played a lot of college football for like 4 or 5 or even less than that.
I would never in a million years, like the NFL, you have to draft somebody, but the draft slot where you pick them is set, right? What NIL has turned into, especially, with recruiting a freshman, it's much more like free agency. You get to pick and choose. In stories, people, and I've talked to some people, like Kirby Smart is not comfortable paying huge amounts of money for high school recruits at quarterback. That's why Riola is at Nebraska and not at Georgia. So to answer the second part of your question, I would not be in the business of giving millions of dollars to a high school quarterback. I think that is fucking insane. I mean, I watched Arch Manning come in that Georgia game. Like, do you know an underrated story about Arch Manning that no one's going to talk about till next year? Like, doesn't have the greatest arm. Like, he's not. This is not Josh Allen. Now I was close to him when he was warming up. He's big, but he's like a baseball pitcher that's 6'4" that throws 92. He's not throwing 100 miles an hour, and I don't think most people realize that. Like, he's much more like Peyton. So it's
Mm.
like he's going to look differently than I think like people expect Caleb Williams with an arm or even Jaden Daniels. That's not really his thing. So listen, I've never, besides some clips on Twitter of Bryce Underwood, I to me it's national championship. Like that's some out of his control. Like their team has to be good, so it's on the coach and the program. But anything less than being like a potential first round pick after a year or two starting, where it's pretty clear he's one of the best players in the country, is a complete waste of resources because while there's no salary cap like the NFL, these programs don't have unlimited millions, right? And soon it's going
they
to be
got
capped, right?
yeah, they got $50 million in NIL for Michigan this year because of Oracle's CEO and like the alums they have and stuff too. But you're right, there's no salary cap right now. I think the NCAA is trying to get that over, but if you got $50 million, then
Well,
hopefully
yeah,
you can
if you have
recruit.
$50 million, it's hard to screw that up,
Yeah.
right? But Larry Ellison, the Oracle guy, he's not even a Michigan alum, right? He's just dating the chick that went to Michigan.
I
Is that
think
the
you're right. I think you're right.
I
Royal
I talked to
boyfriend.
someone that's kind of in the loop, or at least has secondhand heard some things. This isn't they're cutting him a $12 million check. It's like a year by year. You get a couple $1 million, you hit incentives, like you got to stay with the program. But I don't know, man. If you had to say does this work or it doesn't work, I would say it does not work, right? The other thing is like, and here's what I do respect about Arch. Arch is pretty low key, right? He's been a backup now for a couple years. If it doesn't work, it's not going to derail the program. It would be a big story if it just turns out Arch is, let's just say, not as good as Quinn Ewers or something, right? Because people are going to expect a huge upgrade when he starts, which I'm telling you right now, I think people be careful what you like. And I'm not saying he's going to be bad, but people are expecting to see like Tim Tebow meets Cam Newton meets Caleb Williams, like the greatest college football player of all time. And I'm just not sure that's going to take place. But I would say the same thing with Underwood, right? What are Michigan fans going to expect when this guy starts playing? Because fair or not, and who knows, these numbers get out. It's not like this public information. What if he's only making like $1 million next year? Everyone's like, oh, this $15 million kid. Do you have to start him immediately? Like if Nebraska didn't have to, would they have just taken a deep breath and started someone else and let Riola come into it, or do they just have no choice? Now maybe like Nebraska, it's not like Michigan has better options on the roster right now, but I don't know. Like, have you watched this kid play at all on YouTube or anything?
No, I haven't. No. Yeah, I'm like you. I'm not a big high school guy, but to your point about Arch Manning, like I think people get so enamored of him playing this season. He's had some reps started. He's played against UL Monroe, UTSA, and Colorado State is what Arch Manning has. So he hasn't faced any type of pressure. So that like to me, like when people are so enamored by Arch Manning making all these throws and stuff, it's like, okay, but how about Nick Scorton from Texas A&M running you down? How are you going to do? And then he played in Georgia and he couldn't do anything against Georgia.
No. In fairness, I mean they got four NFL guys, but
Yeah,
I
Olenga.
haven't
Yeah,
looked at their schedule in 25. I would imagine it's not easy in the SEC where he's going to be the starter. And in fairness, and I respect Sark about this. They usually play someone real in the non-conference. Like you're playing real teams. I guess overall, I saw some clips of, you know, BK who's getting crushed because of their season, and this is like added negativity on it. This becomes much worse. If LSU was undefeated, it'd be like, oh, Brian didn't even want him anyway, right? But when you're having a shitty season, it's like, oh, are we losing it? I would say would not shock me at all if this is not a big deal at all for LSU. And I would not be in I don't think it's crazy. One, I mean, the way you described it and seeing Larry Ellison's name on all these, maybe they couldn't compete with the offer, which what are you supposed to do if you can't compete with the offer? There's literally nothing you can do. And two, do you really want I just think it's a very slippery slope when we're talking this much money with college kids. Like, what the fuck is this guy? And I'm not against him getting paid, but how weird is it for literally everyone else on the team? Like, Michigan's going to have some right tackle who's making a couple hundred grand who might be, what if by the end of the year he's a way better prospect than this other guy? And he's like, God, this guy pulls up in a Rolls Royce. We don't even see him. He doesn't hang out with the team. It just gets weird.
I feel you. All right, let's get back to some football talk. What happened last weekend? I want to talk about this team because we're both in Arizona. Arizona State Sun Devils, 1 win away from the Big 12 title. Kenny Dillingham in year 2, 9-2. The sudden turnaround. What's your overall reaction by this team? Because 16th, they were picked 16th before the season to in the Big 12, and now they're odds-on favorite to win the Big 12 right now.
Kenny Dillingham is he's a absolute nut job. I mean, that video of him surrounded by the fans screaming at the referees,
with his wife behind him.
with his who turned around after he started like screaming F bombs at him, is everything that I love about like the type of human being I want in my life. Now, they should never have been in that situation. Like, what was he doing at the end of the game? Like having his quarterback run around, throw. It was a disaster. If that was an NFL game with what was on the line, like two playoff teams, he would have got eviscerated. I mean, because it was you start doing the math when they still had some timeouts. You're like, Kenny, how's this going to work? Like, you're still going to have 6 or 7 seconds, or it was going to be like 12 or 13 seconds on fourth down. Your quarterback, like, is he going to be able to throw it in the air high enough after running around for 5 minutes? Even the play before on third down, like it could have gotten really bad really fast. I know he was mad, but it was like, Kenny, you were flirting with disaster there.
God. There was
But it
like
was,
50 seconds left. 50 seconds left. Cam scouted by one of the best running backs, gets 4 yards. You're on the 3 yard line. You're up five. Why not score and be up 12 with
yeah.
40 seconds left? Yeah, I agree. But what do you make of like their turnaround? Because I think in the new age of college football, and let's face it, the younger generation with the transfer portal and NIL, they're more sensitive to hard coaching. And I feel like a guy like Kenny Dillingham, he coaches hard, but he's also personable and can relate because of his age. And I think that kind of translates to their play this season.
I think he's a cool story because, this is a guy that did not play football in college. Like, he got hurt his senior year in high school, tore his ACL here in Scottsdale. Like, he's from this area. First time I ever heard about him is when I first moved to Scottsdale, probably late 2021, when I was coming here a lot. I played golf with a couple guys at the Phoenician. And it always comes up and what I'm doing and what they do. And we start talking football. And this guy tells me, he's like, my neighbor, their son is the offensive coordinator at the University of Oregon. He's a big time up and coming coach, and his name's Kenny Dillingham. And I didn't know much about him, but when Dan Lanning first got the job, that was his guy. And what he's done a couple years later at Arizona State, like, I don't think most people realize, because everyone talks about Deion Sanders constantly, and rightfully so. I mean, Colorado's, and they got, two guys that are going to be drafted potentially like 1 and 2. Dillingham not only does not have two guys that are going to be drafted 1 and 2, I doubt they even have a guy that's going to sniff, I don't know, the top 50 in the draft. He is one win away from being coach of the year in the Big 12. Like, Deion Sanders is not going to be the coach of the year. And you could argue like Dillingham would deserve it because, like, Deion's had a great turnaround, but he does have the two best players in the country potentially. Dillingham has a white running back from Sac State that's his best offensive player, who kind of is pretty sweet. Looks like Mike Allstott.
No, he's phenomenal, man. And their transfer portal recruiting class was ranked 66 in the country. So on top of that, they kind of call themselves like the team of misfits, but overall, just an unreal story for
Weren't they
Arizona
picked to
State.
finish last in the Big 12, I think?
Yeah, they were picked to finish 16th, coming off a 9-3-9 season, bowl ban, bunch of chaos. And then I like him after talking about how these players deserve to get paid because, I mean, we both live here. Like, Phoenix is such a big city, so much going on, so much pro teams. So I think it's also cool for him to say, hey, let's start paying NIL. You just kind of hope long term that ASU can keep him, because a guy like this, if he goes to like an Auburn or like a Florida, well, not Florida with Napier there, now he's doing well, but I mean, the sky's the limit for him to be at an SEC school.
I think he is 1 year away. I don't know. I saw Feinbaum saying that there probably weren't going to be that many jobs opening up this season. So we might be a cycle away, but he wins. He doesn't need to win 10 next year. He wins 8 or 9 again at Arizona State. I think he is a lock, like, to be the hot name in college, or one of them. At Arizona State, this program has been a joke. Herm Edwards got fired, was coach for 5 years. ESPN's like, we'll rehire you. I was like, oh, you're going to talk about college football? He knows the landscape. No, he doesn't even speak about it. It shows you. I mean, I had people telling me that Herm couldn't name half his team. Like, it was an embarrassment when he was
That's
here.
bad.
It really was. And obviously they had a lot of good players over the years, and it never turned into much. And I'd even say most of my, you were born in 99. When I was in college in the mid 2000s and you were like 4 or 5, they had Dennis Erickson, and they actually had some, like, they recruited pretty well. But it always felt like something was missing and they could never quite get it going. And it goes back to, like, Jake Plummer, they had a couple moments, the Tillman years with Jake Plummer, but for the most part, this program's kind of, I don't even want to say underachieving because you live here, you realize no one really cares. But if they could make you care, I do think they could be a big deal. One, it's way easier to get there than it is to go to a NFL game, and it's
Mm.
obviously way cheaper. And you watch that environment, it actually is pretty cool. Even if you live where I live in North Scottsdale, you're 20 minutes away from there. And if they're playing, cool teams, I actually think that they could get a little life. Now, you start getting he wins 9 games next year, you get, 60-70 million dollar offer from some SEC school. What's Arizona State going to do? And he just has to leave because you just go, is it sustainable? Then part of the reason he's banging the table because he knows the only way he can compete is to pay the players. And I remember when uh I was flipping around channels early on when he got hired, and they do training camp in Flagstaff because it's so hot, in Tempe, which makes sense. In August, it's 175 degrees. And he said that someone asked, like, who is that old man, at training camp standing next to you? And he described the guy that was really their only donor that gave Kenny Dillingham $1 million. I forget his name, but he's some businessman, around the program. And they were fucked because Dillingham, when he first got hired, said if I don't raise some money, my entire team's going to transfer. We're not going to have a football team.
Mm.
And he's like, this is the only guy that stepped up. And the guy asked me at the start of training camp, he's like, where do you want me to stand during practice? And Kenny Dillingham said, you can walk to the middle of the fucking huddle. This program doesn't exist without you. And it was like, you realize how can Dan Lanning relate to that at Oregon or DeBoer at Alabama? I mean, this is the thing with NIL. It's kind of the haves and the have-nots. Even this is the thing with Colorado. Like Dion doesn't have NIL issues there. I mean, his kids are on KFC commercials and Allstate commercials. Like they're living large.
Yeah, speaking of Colorado, spoke too soon about the Colorado Buffaloes' tough loss against another hot team in the country. Like the two hottest teams in the country right now. You texted me this: Florida, Kansas. What a turnaround by Kansas! But kind of talk about what you saw in that game. It sucks. Colorado does not control their destiny. The only way they make the Big 12 title is BYU, Iowa State, Arizona State. Two of those teams have to lose next week. Other than that, they're not going to make the Big 12 title. So
Yeah, I mean, I think Kansas. I've heard a bunch of people say the stat is the first under 500 team to beat three straight ranked teams. They were a preseason potential playoff team, right? And then they lost all the one score games. They didn't just beat Colorado; they kind of beat their ass. My gambling guy Stuckey was on that matchup like 2 weeks ago. He's like, I'm looking ahead, and that's a game at Kansas. They're going to be a dog against Colorado if they keep winning. Hammer that. And I had been betting Colorado. Now I stayed away, but it was clear earlier, like, oh, this is the difference. Like Colorado came back from Texas Tech, but you're like, they can come back. This game, there was a physicalness to them. I think their running back went for like 250 yards. I mean, just even Dion said, like, we got our ass kicked. So yeah, man, it sucks because I think Colorado, Arizona State would have been pretty sweet. But yeah, I mean, I would say if you could just restart the season right now, Kansas would be a problem.
mm,
They would be a problem. So I don't even think that loss is that crazy. Like Kansas is just pretty good. It's not your
mm.
typical like, Auburn beating A&M's a crazy upset. I think going into the game, Kansas was like a 2 or 3 point underdog. Now, granted, it was at home, at Arrowhead, but
I was just shocked that Colorado could just not stop them once because it felt like Colorado would get within a one possession. They need a critical stop. And then Devin Neal, Jalen Daniels. Like Kansas probably has like two or three guys that will get drafted in the top 3 rounds. Like Devin Neal's a stud running back. And
yeah,
they held the ball for 40 minutes time possession
it's
versus
crazy.
Colorado's 19.
I,
Crazy.
I do think, I mean, that loss derails probably Colorado's championship hopes, which derails their uh, bowl hopes, which is a problem for Colorado's bowl, right? If you want Colorado in a bowl that's not a playoff game, Travis Hunter and Shador Sanders are not going to play. So it makes it a
You
little
think
less.
so? You think so because of Dion? Or will he be like, you know what? We want you healthy for the NFL,
You think
playing
you
the NFL.
think Travis Hunter would play in a meaningless bowl game that's not the playoffs? I don't know. I mean, it
Yeah.
never happens. These guys are the two top five picks.
Hey,
And I
the
get
pop hey, the
Dion.
Pop Tarts Bowl was pretty special last year, might I
Yeah,
say.
well, listen, I'm a sucker for the bowls, but I also think, if Dion Dion's going to be fascinating this next month. The thing is, not that many jobs are open, and he easily could just stay another year if he doesn't go to the NFL, which maybe he doesn't want to go to the NFL. He's tailor made for college because he got that big recruit that announced on McAfee show, and everyone makes a big deal like these recruits. If Dion next year goes to Auburn or Florida State, like his star, that left tackle 77, the number one overall recruit, the new quarterback, like everyone realized these guys can just go with him, right? So it's everyone hypes up these commitments. Same thing with Underwood. Like if Underwood doesn't like Michigan and he can just leave. Like commitments don't mean as much as they did our entire life, where it's like, this guy signed with LSU. Do you remember Landon Collins when he
Mm.
picked Alabama over LSU and his mom got really mad at the Under Armour game? Like that was a big deal because it was like, this guy's just going to Alabama. That's where he's going to play. Like he's not going to. Now, if that happened, you'd be like, well, if he doesn't like it at Alabama, he can just transfer to LSU. So before it was like you kind of, it was like a marriage with not really an out with a divorce because if you did transfer, you had to sit out a year. Who the fuck wants to do that?
Last question for you. Biggest game of the weekend. Texas Longhorns at Texas A&M. Winner of this game will play Georgia in the SEC championship. What's your early look ahead when you look at this matchup? A&M coming off a tough loss at Auburn. Texas on the road, probably going to be, if they win this game, their best win of the season because they don't really have any ranked wins on their schedule. Texas, though, Quinn Ewers is dealing with an ankle injury. So to your point earlier about Arch Manning, if Arch Manning plays, we're going to know a lot about him early in a hostile environment at Kyle Field.
I think Texas could easily lose this game. I mean, assuming that A&M just didn't go into the tank, which they shouldn't, because if they win this game and they're in the SEC championship game, they kind of control their own destiny, right? Because if they win, they automatically get in.
Mm.
We saw that game against LSU at night was insane. I don't know. I mean, I Arch or not Arch, but Quinn Ewers, something's been off with that team, honestly, for weeks. Like you just watch them play, they just feel kind of lifeless is probably the wrong way to put it, but every game is like 14-10. It's like what is going on? Why we know how talented this team is. We know how explosive their offense is. I mean, when I watched them against Oklahoma, I'm like, this team is just going to overwhelm team with talent. Defensively they're stacked, and offensively they have two running backs who can play. The wide receiver number seven's a baller. Like you just get these guys on quick screens and they can take it 50. Yet you watch them against like Kentucky's and the Arkansas. It's like these. Why is it so hard for them to get a 10-point lead? So I just don't trust Texas. They've been winning games, which is what matters. But I know you watch them because your buddies on the staff. Like, don't they just look something's just off?
Yeah, I think that game against Michigan, both Ewers and Texas, you looked at him and you're like, okay, this team's a national championship contender. Like Ewers was throwing it all over the yard. The play calling from Sarkisian was aggressive. And then you're right. Since he got hurt and came back, they've just been so stagnant. And they haven't really gotten the running game going. They did a little bit against Kentucky, but you're going up against a front seven. And I'm worried about the offensive line of Texas because this Texas A&M front seven, Nick Scorton, and what they have is the second or third best in the SEC. So if their offensive line struggles, Ewers doesn't particularly respond well from that. But I think you're right. This Texas team, like the odds right now, they're the third best or fourth best to win. And it's like plus 500, but you don't even feel like confident in betting them because they've been so up and down. They
I'd be
beat
stunned
Arkansas
if
by
they
10
I'd be
2 weeks
stunned if they
ago.
won the national championship. Stunned. They could easily win this week. Like it's not like I have a lot of A&M. They were just down 21-0 against
Mm.
Auburn team. So who knows? I mean, college football now they've been bad on the road, but I have a hard time seeing Sark hoist the national championship trophy,
And
which
they're
is
in the
weird
playoff
because they
too
brought
if they
everyone
win.
back on offense and their defense was way better, and they were right there toe to toe with Michigan. They should have been in the title game, and it feels like in a weird way they're worse. I don't know. Now they lost a couple D tackles, obviously, who are really good. I mean, the dude to the Titans, Sweat, the big guy, and Murphy, but still, to me, it's Ewers. Like he just looks kind of as you. What generation are you? Gen Z?
Yeah, I think Gen Z millennial. Yeah.
You're
Yeah, Gen
definitely not
Z.
a millennial. 80 to like maybe 99. Maybe you're the last year of millennial. I would say he's pretty mid, as the kids would say, average. Like to me, if I was a GM, obviously he's a draftable player. he would just be like, I would not draft the player. Like I'd acknowledge, like, yeah, I third, fourth, whoever, if someone wants him, but he's a no draft for my team.
That's like what's been one of the more not disappointments, but last year you had so much dominant elite quarterback play. It just feels like this year it's been so inconsistent. Like heading into the year, it was Carson Beck, Milroe, Ewers, and just up and down the peaks and valleys. Like the two quarterbacks I would trust right. I mean, the one quarterback I trust right now is maybe Dylan Gabriel in college football right now, and then Cam Ward is the second best, but he throws the ball, interceptions, a little nonchalantness. But from your side of things, like what quarterbacks in college football do you trust?
I do believe the NIL of putting these guys on a pedestal, these guys making so much more than their entire team, these guys being treated completely different, these guys controlling college football because if they transfer, it's such a big deal. Like they have a bunch of leverage, has really derailed the all of my life. These quarterbacks that played in college, even that were stars, from Peyton Manning to Tom Brady through the Leinart era through Tebow. Tebow's a good example. They still felt like a part of the team. And I think now it's got like the best quarterbacks in the NFL. They feel like one of the guys. And I do think it's kind of thrown off its axis with the amount of money these guys are being paid. Like, imagine playing for Georgia, being like the pass rusher Walker, who's going to be, I don't know, top 10 pick, and knowing that Carson Beck gets like three times as you. If it's the NFL, like, listen, it is what it is. There are pay scales. Like, in what world am I getting paid 500 grand and we're paying this guy a couple $1 million? I mean, because as you get older, you mature a little bit. At 20 years old, fuck, no way. I'd be like, what? And I just, and he's living on his own in a high rise and some massive house. And I'm, I just think it's a lot for young people to handle. And I wonder if when you watch these teams play, they don't feel is like cohesive. Like usually in college, even unlike the NFL, like you'd have the same group of guys together forever. And now it's like guys moving and shaking. This guy's gone. This guy's coming. The quarterback just feels not that they haven't always, but I think now knowing how much they're getting has to throw people off on the team. There has to be some resentment. These are human beings. Mm. And these quarterbacks are struggling. That's the thing. Like, so if you're a wide receiver on Texas, even if you're getting broken off and you're making 700 grand, Ewers is making millions. You're like, even if you like Arch, you're like, we know I'm paying this guy $5 million. This is crazy.
Yeah, NIL is just, I don't know, man. I think heading into NIL, I thought specifically for me, I thought NIL was just for like brand deals and for sponsorships for these kids to make money off their name, image, and likeness. And now it's just turned into a tampering,
pay to play.
bribing.
I mean, yeah,
yeah.
That's it. It was. How was it not going to be that way? Because remember, early on, the NCAA was adamant that you had to separate the collective. Well, that's no longer the case. The program's all running. They've just kind of waved the white flag. And these NIL deals, like Underwood was literally, that's not NIL. That's we just bought them. Which again, I'm not against. I don't care. But if you're trying to run a football team and win big, like how did Harbaugh just win with that group? It felt like they were all together. Like JJ was no different than Blake Corum. That was no different than all the defensive guys that all got drafted. And now it feels like, how is Underwood going to show up on campus the first day and view himself as an equal? How could he?
Do you think Sherrone Moore is going to have to probably change his offense too? Because if you're Underwood, you're not going in there handing the ball off as much as Orgy did this year. And JJ McCarthy did, I guess, did throw the ball a little bit, but you're not going to have a Penn State game out of Bryce Underwood.
I think he's going to have to recruit unlike Jim and more like the SEC schools of like getting wide receivers. That wasn't Jim's deal. Offensive, defensive linemen, running backs, quarterback could be the game manager. You don't pay 12 million. Now you could argue that's what the money's for. Do what we tell you. But part of, Ohio State, like why they dominate is they have good quarterbacks, but they also have incredible wide receivers. When's the last time Michigan had like the equivalent of that at wide receiver? Their guys like, wait, Nico Collins went to Michigan? You don't even realize it because the guys in college, they stink or they just don't do much because that's never how Jim played. Look at Jim now. He's like the best receivers, Lad McConkey. It's like a dream come true.
Giving us white boys a chance at wide receiver. I love to see it. But that's
Okay,
all I
bro.
got, man. College football, unbelievable. It's incredible, man.
It
Jeez.
is. It's been a fun year. So we just got, I guess, the conference championship games next week. So we will talk once we have a good idea who's playing who, and obviously there are going to be some serious, for the first time ever, playoff bursts on the line. And I think we'll have a pretty good idea. I would say, what do you think? Maybe beside one spot of the at-large bids, we'll kind of know.
Yeah, and I think a team that loses in the conference championship, I think they've said they're not going to get penalized unless it's
Yeah,
like obviously an A&M who's already had 3 losses. They're going to get knocked out. But if Georgia loses to A&M, let's say
they're
A&M
in.
beats Texas and
Yeah.
they lose to them, they're still going to get in.
I think it's fair to say whoever gets the SEC championship game, there's a pretty good chance that both the schools get there. What's A&M's record right now?
A&M's 8-3.
So you're saying if they lost, they'd have a fourth loss. That'd be interesting.
Well, A&M, if A&M lost, they'd probably get knocked out 4 losses, you would say. But then it's like the extra game. They had a game win against Texas. But then if they win, they're in. And then Georgia would get in as well as a 3 loss team. And then you have Texas as a 2 loss team. You would have Tennessee in the mix too. So then for the SEC's purpose, if you're Greg Sankey, I think you kind of want A&M to win the SEC. So you get 4 teams in versus 3.
Yeah. I would be stunned no matter how the gymnastics work if the SEC is not have four teams representing them. I don't know exactly. It's a little convoluted right now, but I think it the Big Ten ain't getting four teams and the SEC getting three. I think
Mm.
that would be, you talk about a stink, because they'd point right to Indiana and Penn State and be like, this is a joke. Those teams, Penn State, out of the two of them, they've played two real games and they both lost. At least Penn State could hold their head high. I mean, that wasn't like, I mean, they lost by a touchdown at home, but still, it's like that was a bad loss given they were up whatever 7-0 before you could even blink, and then got worked from there. But Indiana, I don't think you can let Indiana in and let some of these SEC teams go play in some random bowls that no one's going to care about anymore beside us gamblers.
Signetti's going to be pissed if he doesn't get in. He's going to be pissed.
Okay, Jackson, enjoy Old Town Scottsdale, and we will talk to you next week, buddy.
Appreciate you. Better lighting, new apartment next week. Appreciate you, John.
Adios.